Are you looking for an experience that will grow your teenagers' faith, increase their leadership skills, and teach them the discernment to engage with the world all around them, all while taking them on the adventure of a lifetime? I mean, who isn't looking for that? If your teenager loves fun, adventure, and wants to grow in their faith and leadership this summer, then send them to Excel's Summer Leadership Camp. Excel's Summer Leadership Camp is a 12-day experience for passionate young leaders looking to discover God's truth, to discern wisely, and live wholeheartedly. Your teenager will embark on a transformative journey in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where they'll build lasting friendships in the context of community, embark on thrilling adventures like camping, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and they will receive expert training and certifications in categories like CPR and wilderness first aid. Each aspect of the camp is woven together to help them learn to discover truth, to discern wisely, and take godly action in the context of real-life situations. To learn more or begin an application, go to theexcelcamp.org. That's theexcelcamp.org. Hurry, because summer is just around the corner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. I'm your host, Tony Miltenberger, and I'm excited to bring you a conversation today with worship leader who shares his vulnerable story. His name is Scott Box, and he wants you to check out his brand new resource, Heroic Disgrace, so he can share his story about mental illness, about life, about hypomania, about trust, and about a lifestyle of worship. So much goodness here. And it's vulnerable, and it's real, and it's everything that we need in such a time as this. Hey, as a reminder, the Reclamation Podcast is part of the Spirit and Truth Podcast Network. To get connected to Spirit and Truth, check out their website, spiritandtruth.life. So many great podcasts there. And if you want more dialogue, go to the Spirit and Truth Living the Faith Facebook group, where you can dialogue with like-minded people like you, like me, and we'll jump in there from time to time. It's a great place to go after the show to just ask questions, talk, do all the things. You can also hook up with me on Instagram at TWMilt. And as a reminder, the best compliment you can give us is share this episode with one friend who might need to hear a message about hope in the midst of pain. As always, guys, I'm incredibly thankful for you, and I can't wait for you to jump into this conversation with Scott Box. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have with me worship leader, author, and speaker, Scott Box. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story today and be willing to come on the podcast.
Yeah, you bet, Tony. It's my pleasure. And yeah, man, thanks for having me on.
Well, I want to jump into your story a little bit, but I thought maybe it'd be wise to start from a macro perspective.
Yeah.
I'm curious. You've done a lot of different things. You're doing some different things now. How would you describe the call that God has placed on your life?
A lot of it is connected to what I've just written about in my book. But I know I'm a worship leader. But also I know I'm not a worship leader in the traditional sense. I've actually come off of platform, Tony, in the last couple years, and I did it in order to figure out what the heck real worship is. That's what I was struggling with. Like, what? There's this word in the Christian, in the church that's worship, and I know other cultures use the word too, but the Christian culture has this thing around what worship is, and I would see myself as a worship leader, but well, I suppose that's what we're going to discuss a little bit too, along the lines of some of the mental health stuff that I've struggled with. But yeah, my calling is to be a worship leader.
I love it, and I love the fact that it looks different now than it ever has. And I'm wondering if you might share a little bit of that story. How did you get to where you are now in this kind of new understanding of of who you are and how God wired you and how that plays out in the church?
Yeah. A lot of it's connected to my health. I when I was about 30 years old, so I'm 45 right now, and when I was 30, I received a diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder, and
Hmm.
I'll, I'll I'll just say it right out of the gate. It was a relief to get the
Wow.
diagnosis. It wasn't a death. It didn't feel like a death sentence to me. I, in other words, life was pretty hellish prior to that, and I could explain more, but I had been experiencing all the symptoms of bipolar disorder, and I was unmedicated, and I really my was questioning my heroism, which is
Yeah.
interesting because there's an aspect of my family. I grew up being raised to be this heroic figure, and it's a thing, whatever. But it was a thing, and I was broken. I was broken, and I couldn't be that hero. Um, and I was also realizing, as a Christian man and as a pastor, I was I was far too sinful. I was far
Mm.
more sinful than I thought I was supposed to be, and I just felt there was this sense of, because of my mental health and because of all those other things, I really felt like I had no moral authority, and
Mm.
and so my role in the church and my place in the church and my understanding, I was just, everything was up in the air. The only thing I really felt like I could grasp, Tony, uh, was my friendship with Jesus. And frankly, I
Mm.
didn't have one, but I knew
Wow.
that if what I believed was true, then I could have one. And so I went hard after becoming a friend with Jesus.
So I don't want to ever like trying to put your story kind of together for our listeners. Um, you're pretty late in life to get a bipolar disorder. Um,
I
is
didn't I didn't
is
hear
that a
you.
correct?
Well, I'm
It
pretty what?
feels a little, yeah, it feels a little later in life to get a bipolar
Ah,
disorder.
gotcha.
What was it like to kind of work in um in in the church, which I've worked in the church for a long time, and even though the church preaches grace, it's not always very graceful. So, what was it like to
Right.
work in a church, not having a
Right.
diagnosis and kind of living in that tension of your body doing different things that you really can't explain very well, probably?
Well, certainly it was hard, and some of the aspects too of what I was dealing with, um, were connected to, areas of shameful things like pornography use. I mean, stuff like that.
Sure.
That absolutely, like I said, that there were some challenges when it came to this sense of moral authority that I didn't feel like I had it anymore.
Mm,
But I also knew this. I also knew other dudes in the church, and
sure.
I can't speak to the females. I'm not a female. I don't really know what they struggle with in the church leadership, but I know dudes do. I know I knew guys were struggling with similar things that I was struggling with, when it came to, lustful thoughts and all of that stuff. But and I will also fall back on Carrie Ann and I, my wife, and I suppose we weren't stupid, Tony, but I do think that we were naive to think that everybody was dealing with the same problems that we were. Uh, they weren't. The other people weren't dealing with. I mean, certainly other people have their own problems, but
Right.
they weren't dealing with the massive hypomanic highs and then the gigantic. The diagnosis did freak some of my church friends out. I know that for them, they thought it disqualified me, from ministry, and I certainly I certainly didn't feel that way. In fact, I felt like I should, of all the places to to work through this. I could do it and be a leader and be a model, be a role model in some way. I felt that was my responsibility, so I didn't feel disqualified.
Hmm. Why do you think the church has so much issue with mental illness? When did that become such a thing that we never talked about?
Hmm. Well, I do think that there's aspects of, in some of my study too, you think of the, the, the miraculous things. What was Jesus healing? Was Jesus healing true demonic stuff? Probably. What was
Yeah.
he also potentially healing some mental health things? Probably. was
Yeah, absolutely.
was he healing physical needs? Absolutely. And was he healing spiritual needs? 100%. So I feel like one of the things, Tony, that we've lost in the church is the holistic perspective of mind, body, and spirit. And I don't know where that went off the rails, but it has. And you've got people who are unhealthy and in church leadership and they are physically unfit for church
Mm.
leadership, if you will. If you hold me to a mental standard of being mentally unfit, then I look at somebody else who's just 100 pounds overweight and say, well, what come on. And so, okay, that breaks down. I get it. But the point is that we need to look at this from a holistic standpoint, just like Jesus and the disciples did. Uh, they went out to not just heal the soul, but the body and the mind as well. The church should be about that, 100%.
Yeah, I think one of the dilemmas that we run into is that there's a lot of people who don't know that they're unhealthy, or don't see it.
Right.
You know, I would be curious to hear a little bit more about your story and kind of that moment where you realized this is not normal, and what I'm wrestling with here is bigger than everything else.
Right. Yeah. The not normal part. Um, so back to your question about or your comment on kind of being late in the game, the diagnosis. My, my understanding, you're probably right. I mean, it is on that later side of things. My understanding is that for men, especially, between ages 25 and 30 is when the bipolar symptoms. That's kind of when it amplifies, and whether it's stress related, there might be some
Mm,
stress related things involved in that. Uh, to which then, back to your original question, um, that that or to this question about kind of when and what were those things. Uh, it was in that 5 year gap, roughly for me, 26 to 30, roughly 4 years, where things were amplifying to the standpoint where I knew I did know something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it though, and neither could my wife, and nor were our friends. I mean, mental disorders are hard for that reason. And so here's the
yeah.
thing: Carrie Ann and I stumbled into counseling. We were looking to adopt a child, and
Mm,
our one of the things that you just have to do with counseling or with adopting is you got to see a counselor and see if you're mentally fit to bring a child into your home. And so thankfully we got, that box was checked, Tony. But along the way, Carrie Ann and I realized, wow, there's some value in this Christian counseling thing that we kind of stumbled into. And so why don't we keep doing it? And then over the course of a year of going together, and that's been our thing for 15 years roughly. We just,
Wow.
every counseling session we do together, with the exception of a couple times where I needed to 911 my counselor and be like, all hell is breaking loose, I need help right now on Saturday, and that what a blessing to have that in
Yeah.
the tool belt. But I things had amplified and amplified and amplified to when God, it seemed, just made the opportunity. It gave us this opportunity and this relationship with this woman who has become our counselor, who's become, not a part of the family, but doggone near. I mean, she's such an important part of our life, and that's just part of our story. So, did I answer your question as far as kind of? I didn't get to the
Yeah.
specifics of what the things were, I suppose, but I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know.
Well, I don't think it's necessary. I think that's kind of the gist of what I was going for is like, when did you kind of know that things were a little, when did you have your eyes open, so to speak? And it sounds like
Let,
that counseling moment was
right.
pretty pivotal.
Let me throw this in. Hypomania is a drug. Okay, so if you've got depression on the bottom end of things and you've got mania on the high end, there's this there's this beautiful place right before the top that's glorious, and I call it hypomania land. I mean, there's this place that's just, it's epic. The problem is on the way up when you're going through that hypomanic stuff, and it's creative as heck. I mean, oh gosh, it's so good. There's 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 a problem though, because then those times of irritation start coming, where lights get too bright, sounds get too loud, feelings, clothing just becomes something you can't wear. And I just wished, once I got naked, I wished I could just hover off of the floor. These are the bad things that I started to experience, and I didn't. That's when I knew. That's when I knew there was a problem.
Can now that you're on the other side of this, well, not that, well, now you've
Yeah,
got more wisdom around it, more experience.
yeah.
Can you see moments like these coming? Is how you handle it differently now? Have you learned, some awareness about
You bet.
the hypomania parts?
Yeah, there's one of the things I talk about in my story is the fact that I was very much opposed to medication for years of my life. I wouldn't even take Advil. I was a baseball player. I'd get
Hmm.
I'd get beat up behind the plate. I was a catcher, and I just grin and bear it. I loved the bruises. I would just, here's my bruise, let me show you. And stupid macho hero stuff. Again, that was just part of my thing. Um, as it Okay, so remind me, where were we going with that? The
About your awareness currently to hypomania and learning to become, uh, you know, kind of learning to know when it's coming, or do you know when it's coming, or
so,
how does that
thank
kind of
you.
work?
Yeah. So as far as medication, then thank you. This idea of it being something that I was adamantly against when I received my diagnosis, and once I had a year of trust built up in this counselor and this medical team, because we also had a psychiatric nurse
Mm,
practitioner who was a part of the process. And the reason a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner is important, Tony, is because they're the ones that can provide the medication. They're the ones that prescribe,
yeah.
and they'll work in concert with the psychologist. Once Libby, our counselor, Elizabeth Hamilton, she's amazing, but we call her Libby. Once Libby said, Scott, look, medication is is important. Trust us. This will help you manage your life. It will not change. You will still be Scott Box. It's just going to help you.
Mm.
It's going to lower the highs and raise the lows, and it's going to make your life manageable. Will you trust us? And my response was not hell no. It was yes. It was yes. Because it would have for years been absolutely not, exclamation point, in caps. But once I realized what life was like on the other side, Tony, once I had experienced that,
Yeah.
I didn't want to. As much as I wanted to live in hypomania land, I knew what the price was for my wife and our young daughter at that point in time, and we've since had a son. And I was unwilling to go back once I knew. And when they said, trust us, it will be like a light switch is flipped. You will know when the medications start to work. I believed them.
One of the phrases that you use in the book is a lifestyle of heroic disgrace. And I'm curious if you can kind of paint the picture about what that phrase means to you and why it's so important now.
You've maxed out your 401k, you're contributing to an IRA, and making some other investments. You're ahead of the game and doing well. But where do you go from here? The same old story can only get you so far. If you want a new take from a new type of financial professional, we invite you to get a fresh perspective beside an agent with the backing of New York Life. Insurance, investments, retirement, and more. Visit NYL.com to learn more. Investments are offered through registered representatives of NYLife Securities, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a New York Life company.
The thing that I'm trying to do, and this is, I don't mean to over spiritualize this in any way, but for all of us, the intersection, this is what's so amazing for me. The intersection between my journey of as a pastor, as a Christian leader, and then somebody who was dealing with mental illness at a level that it changed me. It changed me. I became desperate. I became desperate in a way I never realized I was supposed to be or designed to be. That's kind of the miracle of my bipolar disorder, is that I realized I didn't just need more Jesus than Tony needs more Jesus. You and I were designed to be desperate for Jesus. And there was that moment of realization where I recognized that the heroism that Jesus modeled was an upside down type of heroism. In other words, in the world's eyes, we see that heroes need to be winners. Well, Jesus came along and he shows that well, he was like pretty much the biggest loser. And, and what a complete paradigm shift that Jesus shows, that what true heroism looks like. And along those lines, how amazing, how disgraceful it looked for him to wash his disciples' feet. How disgraceful it was to be nailed to a cross for my sins. What a heroic disgrace Jesus was. Oh, but that is what's so magnificent about it, because that's the lifestyle that I see that Jesus has modeled for us, that I've been able to connect the dots to what true worship is. Worship is not just singing in church. It's not 10 a.m. on Sunday morning, that type of thing. Worship is a lifestyle. And that's what heroic disgrace means to me.
So I imagine there's somebody who's listening right now who's like, man, I want to have a lifestyle of worship. I'd prefer not to have a life-altering diagnosis in order to get it. How do we usher someone into a lifestyle of worship on a random Tuesday?
Yeah. We all have pain. This is one of the things that if I wasn't if I think God has used my bipolar disorder in order to get this message into the world. Uh, but I am the least likely guy to have this opportunity. I'm a train wreck when I'm talking to people. It's a miracle that you and I are even talking right now. The joy though of this, on one hand, that my train wreck of a life is that we all have train wrecks of a life. And on a random Tuesday, some listeners listening to this, they have to realize, just as I've realized, and just like that, Jesus is calling us to harness our pain to be a witness, to live a lifestyle that can, a lifestyle that's upside down. And I don't know how else to do it other than to try to motivate people with a different perspective. And I don't know. Other than this, I don't feel the pressure anymore to be the one that changes somebody's mind. I trust that the Holy Spirit can do that in a heroic and a disgraceful way, but he can do it through people's pain.
Hey guys, just pausing this conversation with Scott to remind you that the Spirit and Truth is a ministry. And as a ministry, we're continually looking for financial partners. If you want to become a monthly giver to Spirit and Truth, it goes a long way to support that all that God is doing on this podcast. Go to spiritandtruth.life/give. Become a monthly partner today. And we are incredibly thankful for all of our partners and all the people who have already signed up. It's a great way to support the podcast. And it absolutely goes back into the ministry that God is doing through Spirit and Truth. Now, let's finish up this conversation with Scott.
So this idea of being able to convince somebody on a random Tuesday is one of those things that I suppose I do need to think a lot more about. But I do know this. I know that we all struggle with aspects of pain in our lives. It doesn't have to be mental. It doesn't have to be bipolar disorder that flips your world upside down. It could be a loss of a friend, a family member. It could be loss of a job. It could be whatever it is. There's pain in our lives that make us question things, and make us question our place in the world, and our even our health. Am I doing what's right? And I will say that I don't put the pressure on myself anymore like I used to, that I have to convince somebody else that they need Jesus. I'll tell my story, and then I let the Holy Spirit, I let the spirit part of the Trinity do his work in other people's lives. And I'll say this one more thing. If I was trying to convince you right now, Tony, that you need to live a lifestyle of heroic disgrace, I I would just, oh man, I would want you to know that regardless of your pain, regardless of where you are in your health, I would want you to know, like I know, that God makes healthy what he doesn't heal. In other words, health is always an option, some type of health, even when healing is the most absurd impossibility. And I would just go hands off then. If you don't believe that, that's between you and God. But if you believe that, you can now enter into this lifestyle of heroic disgrace that I'm discussing. This kind of cracks the door. In fact, it doesn't just crack the door; it kicks the door in.
Do you think that most of us struggle with the idea of heroic disgrace because of the cultural kind of connection to heroism? I mean, let's be honest, there aren't many, incredible movies or books out there about heroes that lose. So
Right. Right. Yeah.
how do we
Yeah.
wrestle with the tension of what the culture says? And obviously, we know that Jesus wins in the end, but you still have to get through Friday and Saturday to get to Sunday. How
Yeah.
do we live in all that?
Yeah. What comes to mind is there's also not many fat superheroes either, are there?
Right. You're
There's
right.
not overweight superheroes. I was thinking about, Mr. Incredible, right? Mr. Incredible, he was out of shape for a minute or two in those movies, and then he became a stud again. Oh man, I I don't have an easy answer
Mm,
for that. Uh, I I know I know that the pursuit and the reflection of Jesus demands that I do something different with my life, though. And when I think of a lifestyle of heroic disgrace, I I think that I mean this isn't what I think. This is what God tells us. But my the way in which I approach it is from a worship perspective. And my worship perspective is in this definition of worship that it's really three words. I use one word twice, but it's pursue Jesus, reflect Jesus. Pursue Jesus, reflect Jesus as a habit that leads to hope. And see, here's the problem. What we struggle with when we don't live lifestyles of heroic disgrace, we can our desperation, like we talked about a few minutes ago, our desperation can the, can lead us to
mm,
hopelessness. That's the problem that we live with in our culture is desperation in these times triggers hopelessness. And as opposed to redirecting that desperation to a dependence on Jesus. And that's the fruit of desperation. That's not the rot. The rot of desperation is
mm.
hopelessness, but the fruit of desperation is directed properly is that pursuit and that reflection of Jesus be out of a deep dependence on him. And heck, maybe I've just got an inside track on that because I'm so freaking broken. I don't know. I can only speak for myself, but I don't think I've got the inside track. I think there's a couple millennia of people who have kind of gone before you and me and figured this thing out and lived heroic lifestyles of disgrace, lifestyles of heroic disgrace.
How do you discern? So a little bit of my story. I've wrestled with alcoholism,
Yeah.
and I've got an
Yes.
addictive personality. And so one of the things that I'm always aware of is that I'm 24 hours away from ruining my entire life at any given moment. I just kind of as a general framework for me, like, and so one of the things that I love to ask people who are open about their struggles is how do you discern God's voice and will in your life versus the voices that exist inside of you?
Well, when it comes to things of my appetite, uh, I can often I it's if we're talking difference between appetite and God's
Mm,
voice, there's often a very distinct difference that I can recognize when it's me versus when it's God because my appetites drive me toward uh, things that are not um, holy, that are that maybe not even that spiritual. Let's put it this way: my appetites will drive me in a direction that could trigger my obsessive or the things that are negative that could cause me pain in my relationships, pain and breaking me down in my health. Uh, I know those things. I don't need God to tell me those things. I know that if I had if I was struggling with alcoholism, just as an example, I know plenty of people that know they cannot have a single
Yeah.
drink, uh, or they, or, or it's a big problem. Um, as far as I don't know,
Hmm.
man. I do know that the pursuit and the reflection of Jesus requires a day in and day out uh, relationship and desperate dependence on Him. And when you have that, it's way easier to identify the voice of the Lord, if you will. It's that's on us,
Yeah.
though. I mean, it's like, God, give me your voice. Tell me your opinion about this. And we haven't been hanging out with him. We won't know his stinking
Yeah.
voice. you know, that's a big problem. And I speak from experience.
How do you remain dependent? Maybe that's the right question then is I have some friends in Cuba and they're dependent on the Lord all the time, but that's because they also don't have anything to
Yeah,
eat, you know?
right,
Um,
right.
whereas I live a really comfortable life and I'm thankful.
Yeah.
And so my dependence has to be a little bit more intentional. How does that work in your life?
I've thought about this. I feel very fortunate. I feel very fortunate to be one of those who wrestled with this at a younger point in
Hmm.
my life. It's easy for us to look at the people who, like you mentioned, are suffering from very real
Yeah.
needs, and life and death type of things, and go, oh well, they obviously depend on Jesus. And it's also another example would be, somebody's retired, they're gonna live, hopefully another 20 years of retirement, and they find out they've got
Mm.
cancer. And, oh man, that person, you realize they depend on Jesus, or they don't. But often those are the situations that somebody realizes, wow, I need Jesus really bad. Uh, I hit that point when I was 30 years old and way younger than most people in America. And I feel like that is part of the gift and the blessing that I was able to identify the painful thing. And I don't I don't know if I'm humble or not. I think there's this sense of just like, dear God, take this thing from me because I need you so badly. That's coming out of the
Yeah.
heart. So I don't feel like I have to be starving to get to that place, or to have a terminal illness to get to that place. I don't think you need that either, and I don't think your listeners, our audience, needs that either. There's just a sense of
Hmm.
submission, and if we don't get to that place of submission, yeah, we won't get to that place of desperation either.
That's really good. As you have kind of put your story out there, and I would imagine writing a book like this that's so personal and so intimate, it it holds up a mirror to a lot of things. What did you learn about God in the process?
I learned I learned about the
Hmm.
heroism of God in a way that I love this idea of Jesus flipping heroism upside down. And what we know about God, we know because of
Hmm.
Jesus. And I love that we can I love that we can be heroic as Jesus is heroic without
Yeah.
shame. He because he calls us to be that way. He calls us to love as he loves. He calls us to serve as he serves. If this is what God the Father is like, I'm in. I'm
I love
in.
it.
I want I want that kind of God. And that's what I've learned. And again, I don't have it all figured out, man. I just know that God is so much bigger and is calling me into something so much
Mm,
greater, and all of us into this heroic journey. And it is heroic. We should not back
yeah.
down from that idea of heroism, but we have to redefine it in the same way that we have to redefine and reframe at things like worship. Worship is not just singing, that is incomplete. Worship is a lifestyle of pursuit and reflection of Jesus. I've learned some great things about God.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Okay, I have one more question for you. Before I ask it, though, I know that my listeners are going to want to follow your ministry, learn more about what God is doing in you and through you. Where are all the best places on the interwebs to find all things Scott Box?
Thank you for asking that question. I appreciate it. I do most of my communication on Facebook at Worship Hero, uh, just at Worship Hero. And you can find the book at heroicdisgrace.com. I am also at worshiphero.com.
So good.
Out on Twitter, out on Instagram, all that fun stuff.
Good. We'll link to all that too in the show notes so people can find it.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, last question I always love to ask people. It's an advice question, and except I get to name the day and the time where you're going to give yourself a piece of advice. And so I want to take you back to the day before your bipolar diagnosis.
Good.
And if you were going to sit down knee to knee with that younger version of Scott and look him in the eyes and maybe even hold his hands, what's the one piece of advice you're going to give him?
There was a time in my journey where I was nearly 300 pounds, and I had just had vocal cord surgery. There was no guarantee that I was going to be able to rehab and be able to be a worship leader in the way that I thought I was supposed to be a worship leader. I had just come out of the therapist office. I'm sweating. I rode the elevator and I'm sweating. Basically, I was so out of shape. Everything was I was in pain. And I sat down in the car, and I had just gotten in a kind of verbal battle with my therapist, who I thought was a total jerk. And she ended up being absolutely amazing. Because in so many ways, there's so much to that story, but she wrote 2 words on a little sheet of paper that I flipped around. I was a little confused at first, but it said, "Takes everything." She's not a believer. She was not a believer. She told me what it was going to take to get healthy. And her line, it was 2 words: "Takes everything." And I started crying. I'm bawling on my way home. And so there's that. I would give myself the advice: it takes everything. What the heck does that mean? Well, it means exactly what it says. I will also say this: that triggered this aspect in my life of, it can also become too late to get healthy. If I could remind myself, if I could tell myself, if I was there, with my hands on the shoulder, my own shoulders, looking myself in the eye, I would encourage myself that don't even threaten that line of it becoming too late. There could have been a moment in time where it could have become too late to be able to give everything that I needed to get healthy again. It can become too late to get healthy.
That's so good, man. Scott, I just appreciate you. I appreciate your story and your vulnerability. And I'm so thankful for your generosity of time today. And I can't wait to see what God does through this resource.
Thank you so much, Tony. My pleasure. And I love speaking with you, man. Thank you.
Man, I love Scott's heart. I love the way he talks about pursuing Jesus and reflecting Jesus. I love the way he talked about worship and how we're designed to be desperate for Jesus. and so much here that is important for the church. And, I pray that as each and every one of us go into the local church, we keep this message in mind about mental illness. I know that I've had to deal with it as a pastor through various connections, and it's real, and it's hurtful, and it's painful, and trying to figure it out is a difficult task. So do me a favor, follow Scott on Facebook at Worship Hero, and let him know that you heard him here on the Reclamation Podcast. Pick up a copy of his book, Heroic Disgrace. And again, thank you all so much for being a part of this community. It wouldn't be worth it if it weren't for you guys. Finally, guys, remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.